Some books are just histories, and others, they're warnings. Well, Charles Mackay's 19th century masterpiece is absolutely both. Think of it as a timeless field guide to one of the strangest and most predictable parts of human nature: collective madness. That moment when entire populations, just gripped by a single powerful idea, seem to lose their minds all at once. It helps us understand why perfectly sensible people fall for impossible financial bubbles or get swept up in moral panics. And it forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. Why, after all this time, are we still so vulnerable to the exact same things?
And Mackay's writing is just incredible. With language like this, he's not just describing a financial crash, he's painting a picture of the feeling itself. It's this poetic but absolutely brutal summary of the book's core theme, that intoxicating, thrilling flight of collective hope, and then the inevitable, painful crash right back down to earth.
And this really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? It's the one question the book keeps asking. With all of our modern technology, all of our accumulated knowledge, how is it that our minds are still so easily caught in the very same psychological traps that snared our ancestors hundreds of years ago? To get to the bottom of this, Mackay argues that we have to see these episodes of madness for what they are. They aren't random. They're not chaotic. No, they follow a surprisingly predictable pattern, a kind of anatomy of delusion. And it's a pattern that applies whether you're looking at an 18th century stock bubble or a 21st century online craze.
He breaks this pattern down into 3 clear stages. First, it always starts with a really compelling story, one that promises a shortcut to wealth or to certainty. Second, that story spreads like a virus, not because of logic, but because of social imitation. And third, all that excitement spirals into a total abandonment of individual reason.
So stage 1, the seductive promise. Take the story of John Law, the guy behind the Mississippi Scheme in France. He was this brilliant, incredibly charismatic gambler from Scotland, and he walked up to the French government and made them a promise that was just too good to refuse. He could wipe out the entire national debt just by printing paper money, and it would all be backed by the imaginary, limitless gold and silver in the Louisiana Territory. It was the ultimate story. It was the story everyone wanted to believe. You can get rich from nothing.
And that leads right into stage 2, social contagion. The promise is so alluring that the belief just spreads, not because of evidence, but because of imitation. You see your neighbor getting rich, and suddenly the fear of missing out becomes way more powerful than the rational fear of being wrong. In Paris, you had nobles, merchants, and servants literally trampling each other in the streets, all desperate to buy a piece of Law's company. Reason was just tossed aside for the much simpler, much more powerful logic of the crowd. Hey, if everyone's doing it, it must be right.
Which brings us to stage 3, peak frenzy. And honestly, this anecdote from the book just says it all. At the height of the madness, a man with a hunchback was making a fortune by renting out his back as a little mobile desk for stock traders in the street to sign their contracts on. I mean, think about that. This isn't just a funny story, it's a diagnostic sign. When the system gets so frantic that a human back becomes a legitimate piece of financial equipment, you know the fever is at its absolute peak. Rationality is long gone. But as Mackay shows us with chilling consistency, every one of these manias carries the seeds of its own destruction. The fever always breaks. The story falls apart, and the very same crowd that rushed in with so much hope, well, they rush for the exits with just as much panic. And this wasn't some one-off event. At the exact same time all this was happening in France, a nearly identical drama was playing out in England with something called the South Sea Bubble. I mean, just look at this timeline. In 9 months, just 9 months, a nation's fortune soars to these impossible heights and then completely collapses into ruin. The speed is just breathtaking. Fortunes that took generations to build were wiped out in a matter of weeks. The consequences, of course, were devastating. Mackay, here describing the aftermath of an even earlier bubble, the Dutch Tulipmania, really captures the universal human cost of these crashes. It wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These were real people, from every single class of society, waking up from what felt like a beautiful dream to a cold, impoverished reality. And if you want to put a number on that ruin, this was the personal fortune of James Craggs the Elder. He was a key political player behind the South Sea scheme, £1.5 million, an almost unimaginable amount of money back then. It was all confiscated from his estate right after he died suddenly, just as the bubble he helped create was spectacularly imploding. Okay, so this brings us right back to that central, nagging question: why does this keep happening? Mackay's most powerful insight, the reason this book is still so important, is that while the objects of our delusions change, tulips, stocks, new technologies, our fundamental human psychology does not.
And here's the crucial point Mackay makes. While the packaging changes, the core promise is always identical. Look at this comparison. The alchemists of old promised to turn lead into gold using some secret knowledge. The modern promoter of a bubble promises exponential returns using some disruptive new tech. Both of them demand absolute faith. Both of them prey on our greed and our fear of being left behind. And both of them dismiss any skepticism as just a failure of imagination. Sound familiar?
So, the real value of Mackay's work isn't just that it's a collection of fascinating historical stories. It's that it's a manual for clear thinking. It offers a powerful toolkit for actually identifying and hopefully resisting the pull of the crowd.
And these are the book's mental models for survival. First, and this is a big one, distrust any promise of huge rewards with little to no risk. It just violates the basic laws of reality. Second, actively value dissent. When asking tough questions becomes taboo or is seen as heresy, that's a huge red flag that the group has stopped thinking. Third, never, ever forget the difference between the price of something and its actual intrinsic value. The crowd only cares about the price. And finally, always remember that the crowd has no loyalty. Its adoration is intense, but it's incredibly fleeting.
And it's so important to get this. This madness is not just about money. Mackay shows us how the exact same psychological engine drives our belief in prophecies, in fortune-telling, and maybe most chillingly, in moral panics, like the witch hunts. In these kinds of social manias, just the accusation itself becomes its own proof. And the logic of the mob completely overwhelms any sense of justice, creating this terrifying feedback loop of fear and conformity.
So ultimately, Mackay argues that this powerful mix of greed and social imitation is a recipe for delusion. You know, our deep-seated instinct to imitate others, to follow the herd, it's usually a pretty useful cognitive shortcut. But when you amplify that instinct with the promise of fast money or a sense of social belonging, that shortcut can lead you straight off a cliff.
In the end, I think the enduring power of this book comes down to one really unsettling truth. It's not a history book about other people in other times. It's a mirror. It shows us that the line between being a rational individual and being part of a mad crowd is terrifyingly thin, and that line runs through every single one of us. Because the names of the delusions change, but the anatomy of the madness remains the same.